The book we call the Holy Bible is still one of the most influential and widely distributed pieces of literature in the English language. But what exactly is the Bible, and how should we understand its contents? I'm Pastor Chris White, and that's my assignment over the course of this series, What You Should Know About the Bible. In the last couple of installments, we began looking at the doctrine of canonicity. In theological terms, this answers a very specific question. Which books should be included in the Holy Bible as inspired texts? Further, it answers another question: why were some texts excluded? In this episode, we will continue with the canonicity of Scripture and the history of the New Testament canon. What do we mean by a canon? A canon is a rule or standard that is accepted by all. Once, when I was trying to explain this to a friend, he was quite confused. He thought when people spoke of canonizing, it was a reference to the books blown out of the New Testament. That's the wrong kind of canon, my friends. Bible scholar F. Bruce says the canon is the list of the writings acknowledged by the Church as the documents of divine revelation. The canon is beyond merely an official list of books. It is the rule of faith of the Christian. The Christian then has a particular loyalty to a particular series of books as the exclusive source and guide of his religious life. This transcends loyalty to any particular leader or community of faith. Why was it necessary for the Church to recognize a canon? This was precipitated by several known factors. First of all, there were controlling prophets and preachers. A prime example of this was a person we call Montanus. Montanus taught that he was the helper whom Jesus told the church would come and lead them into all truth in John chapter 16. If he was a helper, he was sure late in getting there because Jesus had been gone almost 200 years. But he was also giving teachings that were supposedly new revelations from God, and if new revelations, why not add them to the Scripture? If he had no standard for closing the canon, it would beg the question, why not include the writings of Mohammed, or why not Joseph Smith? Both made claims of being latter-day prophets bringing revelation from God. Another person I want to talk about is Marcion of Sinope. Marcion was a wealthy businessman from Asia Minor who was raised in the church. He believed the message of Christ was so unique and brand new that it was totally discontinuous with the Old Testament. In fact, he believed that the God of the Old Testament was inferior to Jesus. His ideas never caught on in the church, and so he broke away and started his own. He even released his own Bible called The Gospel and the Apostle, which was the book of Luke and the epistles of Paul, because he didn't like the Jews. So one of the problems of the early church were those who would make additions or excisions of the Scriptures, and having an agreed standard would be a solution to this problem. Another factor behind this process was persecution. A prime example of this was the Edict of Diocletian in February of 303 A.D. This Roman emperor started a form of persecution never before practiced. All copies of the Christian Scriptures had to be turned over to the authorities upon pain of death. Prior to this, leaders and individual Christians had been punished but never had their literature confiscated. If you were risking your life to hide a portion of the Scriptures, you would want to make certain that it was a canonical book. In North Africa, those who cooperated with handing over Scriptures were considered traditores or handers over. Such persons were considered apostates, unworthy of communion or fellowship with the church. But what if all they handed over was a Christian book that was non-canonical? Were they now outside the pale of the church? This persecution created an interesting situation where having a definitive statement on the canon would have been helpful. A third and final factor is what we would call perpetuation and propagation of the faith. For many reasons, the church of the first few centuries was very aggressive in the training of its members, especially in preparation for baptism. A canon would regulate which of the books would be used in doctrinal instruction. Also, there was translation and missional work. The Christian faith has always been a missionary faith, which necessitated the Scriptures being translated as the faith left the Greek-speaking world. With translation and copying being such a difficult and expensive proposition, a canon would clarify which books were essential. In our next video, we'll continue to look at the development of the New Testament canon, exploring the process of its official recognition by the Church. I hope you'll come back. Until then, this is Chris White. Thanks for watching.